This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen Scan Plus, the iOS utility that brings scanning, PDF creation, and even optical character recognition to your iDevice. Find out more at smilesoftware.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I'd like to present the head man for Drobo and Transporter, actually, Mr. Geoff Barrall. Jeff,
thanks, Jack.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you
Thanks
again.
for being here.
Yeah. This is the second time this week Jeff and I got to sit down and have a conversation. Last time it was at his house, this time it's here. You have to come to Pennsylvania if you want to come to my house.
All right.
Jeff, I really find your career and your focus right now on storage interesting. Storage used to be something that I don't think a lot of us thought about it until we ran out of it, and even back then it was kind of hard to run out of it. And now you can run out of storage in a weekend. The other interesting dynamic to me is that storage used to be really expensive. So you've made a career in storage and you've created some amazing devices with the price of storage on a per whatever going down, but the demand going up.
Right.
How does that work?
How do you make a career out of storage?
Well, how do you make a career out of storage, and how did you have the foresight to see that storage was going to be just this amazingly important?
Drobo started really back in 2004. And the catalyst for it was the IDC had said that for the first year ever, consumers would spend and consume more storage than businesses. So that was for them, that was the crossing over point. And so there was a sudden surge of interest. And in fact, I was recruited to do a survey for one of the big storage companies to see. They were interested in the low end and the products. You know, there were Ferrisbrook Buffalo had one, Netgear had one, and they asked me to look at them and make recommendations on who they should partner with. And at the time, I had a big stack of USB hard drives at home because I hadn't really looked at the products in the space. So I'd sort of just, and I knew it was a problem for me. And I'm like, that's great. I'll be excited to look at the space and see what's available. And I started by buying I think it was the Buffalo product, which was the bestseller. And I'd seen them all in Fry's on the shelves, and so I thought this was a problem people had addressed. So I brought it, and I remember bringing it home, and so I started setting it up. And it asked me what RAID level I wanted, and then I had to make partitions, and then I had to format. And then I remember the question that sort of tipped me over the edge was I got to a question which was choose your file system. It was Berkeley FS, EXT2 probably, or FAT32. And in history, I once built data centers for a living, and I'd founded a company called Blue Arc, which was enterprise storage. And I got to this question, and I remember thinking, I don't know the answer, right? I have no idea which file system I wanted on the product,
and
right?
You built a data center and
with the experience. And so I'm like, how does anybody set this up, right? Like, it's crazy. Like, it's just far too complicated. And it was as complicated as any of the enterprise stuff I'd worked with. So, I completed my report. I looked at a bunch of products, completed my report, sent it off and said, there's definitely a need. I'm a customer myself, but the products just don't look like they're designed for regular folks. So that was where the genesis of Drobo came from. I just sat down and I'm like, why does storage work the way it does? When you stick a drive in a storage array, surely you want it to be added to the storage. Why do you have to tell the array that you want to add it? And if you've got 2 drives, you want mirroring. If you've got 3 drives, you want striping. Why do you have to tell it that, right? There's only one clear choice. So the goal with Drobo is just to take all of that, messing around with a management interface away, and just provide when you do push a drive in, it adds, in a few seconds. When you have drives, it uses the appropriate layout. And so when you're thinking about it, why do the drives all have to be the same size? Why do they all have to be the same speed? We know how to do these things. So it was just trying to design a product that everybody could use. And it's not necessarily for non-technical people. I'm technical, I don't want to do that stuff either. So just a product that was sort of dead simple to use. And I think it resonated very early on with the Mac community because it's very similar to the approach the Macintosh took, which is a computer for everybody. And we wanted to design a storage device for everybody. So that's how that got started, and that's how it got going. And it turns out, regular people do need storage. And if you want a lot of configuration or a lot of detailed tuning, this may not be the right product. But for the rest of us, this is the product you can use to keep your data safe.
And you seem to have done this at exactly the right moment. As digital cameras became popular, and then we started the megapixel climb that, it used to be, one megapixel was a big deal, and then
Yep.
2, then 4. Now now 40 is a big deal, and most of us have something in the area of 15 to 20. And even if you're not shooting raw, that ends up being a lot of data.
No, it's amazing how much things have changed over the last 10 years. I mean, back in 2005, I was just starting to rip my CDs to MP3s, right? Like, I think it was about that same kind of time, right?
And you weren't using 320 kilohertz either. You were probably at like 128.
No, totally, absolutely, yeah. So I was sort of going through that myself. People did that with the CDs, and eventually a lot of people did it with their DVDs as well, and sort of accumulating this media into a digital format. Cameras, at the time were 2 megapixels or something like that. Now, generating these huge photographs. Yeah, storage has never been more important or harder to manage, honestly, in general.
Well, the other thing too, and I think about the Drobo solving this problem a lot. It used to be when you lost a hard drive or something happened, you would lose, let's just say, this much data. And it was not pleasant, it was not convenient. Now, when you lose a hard drive, if you don't have something like a Drobo, you lose this much data, and it's gone, and it's a lot of stuff that can't be recreated or replaced easily. And that to me is one of the big advantages here, because I don't want to lose anything. I can't afford to lose anything.
Well, backup used to be a lot more straightforward as well. Like, I remember having like 5 floppy disks that contained all my data, and I'd feed them into the backup app, and everything would get back, and I'd be like, great, I'm backed up, And then that wasn't really enough, and then you had more of those. Like, I don't know how many I had before I stopped. And then, it looked like DVDs might work for a while, and then they were just too small again. And so there was definitely a period where we sort of almost ran out of things that worked well from a removable or, a backup standpoint. And then, USB hard drives came in, and for a while that was great, right? And you could use those. But then they started stacking up for me, and they became primary storage as well as backup, and so it got very, very complicated. So something like this is a lot more straightforward.
Yeah. Where do you see the mobile storage market going? Because that's the next thing. We all want to take everything with us.
Yeah.
We want to take, the iPad capacities are getting bigger. The iPhone capacities are getting bigger, and I'm as guilty as the next person. I always want to buy the top of the line, and by the end of, well, not really, by the time the next one comes around, there's more storage, and that's the one I want.
Yep. Well, from a mobile perspective, or in fact from a data perspective in general, file management perspective, I think Dropbox started a revolution, and I think most everybody sort of thinks of Dropbox as one thing, but for me there's two different components to it. One is the file management component, the way it's very easy to share with friends, colleagues, send links, and organize your data however you want. You and I can share a folder. It can be called Geoff for you, it can be called Chuck for me, even though it's the same folder. Like a revolution really in the UI. And then the second piece was they moved it into the cloud. And on the other side of the booth we got Transporter, and what Transporter does is it gives you that usage model, but without the cloud piece, because the cloud piece is very expensive, and so it means you have to segment your data down to a small subset that you can store. What we're trying to do with Transporter, and we've been reasonably successful in the first year, and what we will do is we extend that technology to the Drobo line, is basically bring that user model, so the ability to access all of your data anywhere and organize it however you want, across the whole line. And so I think, already, but certainly as a mainstream thing over the next couple of years, it will just be natural for us all to assume that we have access to all of our data, no matter how large that data set is, from wherever we happen to be. Some of it will sync and carry with us from when we're not connected. Some of it we'll just be able to get when we're connected. But there'll always be a way to go get the data that you want.
So given that, how about the privacy issues, the privacy problems and we're seeing more and more of that. People are being concerned with where their data is being stored, how they're getting access to it when they're not home, and who else has access to it.
Yeah, well, there's been a whole bunch of news about this over the last couple of years, and some of it's been surprising, and some of it's been less surprising, but I suppose the promise of cloud storage is, even though you're storing stuff up in the cloud, it's going to be dealt with responsibly. And the truth about human beings is we're not very responsible. So there was the news last week where Microsoft had looked into the OneCloud files of a journalist that they were having a dispute with, which is not responsible.
Right.
But it's human nature, right? And so there's that angle. There's the angle that the files that you store in the cloud, because of the government legislation about, basically the government legislation around the mega uploads trial meant that the cloud service provider is clearly liable now for what you store. So they have a legal responsibility to search everything you put up there and form their own judgment about whether it's legal or illegal, or appropriate or inappropriate. And they can only do that by digging through your content, which personally I don't like very much.
Sure.
But it's unfortunately it's been legislated, right? And proven now. So there's the legal aspect that they have to intrude on your privacy. There's the moral aspect. We're human, this aspect, and then there's there's been a lot of accidental issues, where companies leave the door open, or there's some hole. There's that sort of intrusion aspect to it as well. So there's a lot of problems with privacy in the cloud, which is again why we've been working on private cloud solutions. There will always be public cloud solutions. They're very good for a lot of different things. But we think for the vast majority of a customer's data, that's something they're going to want to maintain in a very private way for the most part, and especially until a lot of this new legislation and law and controls work themselves out. And so again, we're sort of working to deliver that end of things for folks.
It is a frightening prospect because you think you know where your data is, and you assume that someone like a Dropbox is responsible. And they may be responsible, but they have employees, they have exposures that a lot of us don't fully appreciate.
Yeah.
So if I know that I can have whatever is supposed to be on my private cloud sitting on my desk in my house, at least I have that much. I mean, there still may be other issues, but at least that part I can feel pretty good about.
You know where the data is, and you know who has access to it.
Yeah.
So you have that level of control. And I think what I was saying about the breaking the Dropbox model in half is you can still have all the goodness, but still maintain control and and location of your data.
Yeah.
So it's possible to do both.
And it's you just said it. Transporter's been around for a year, which just is kind of amazing to me how far it's already come in the cost effectiveness of it. If nothing else, just the cost effectiveness of it. And I can't do the numbers out of my head, but if I were to buy the amount of Dropbox storage that I can put on a transporter, I mean, that's not an inconsequential. I can almost buy a Drobo for that.
And the other part of it to consider is that most cloud companies are losing money on the storage solution they provide. So even though the storage in the cloud is very expensive today, the companies are actually losing money on providing it at that price. And there's been a belief that some economy of scale will fix that cost issue. And there's little evidence to suggest that. You probably saw Box filed for an IPO yesterday, and they announced that on 110 million in revenue, they're making 160 million in losses, right? Which is an extraordinary imbalance between the cost and the revenue you can generate on that cost. And this isn't a new thing, actually. Back in 2000, when I was working at Blue Arc and we were making enterprise storage, there was a company called Storage Networks, which was $1 billion IPO. It's going to take, and literally people were saying to us back then, you're going to be out of business in 2 years, the data's going to the cloud. Exodus back in those days, right? Every day's going to Exodus, it's all going to be there. And the economics weren't correct at the time, and they still don't appear to be correct today. So there may be a future point at where that gets addressed, but today the economics just aren't right for that either. So for very large cloud providers like Google and Microsoft, their services are going to be around for the long term, right? Because they're being subsidized by the other parts of the business. But for a lot of these cloud providers that are very small and this is their sole business, it's difficult to understand how they're going to generate enough income to remain in business when it costs more to run the service than it does to provide it. And the problem is, I was at an event the other day, and somebody said there was a company overseas that was giving away 3 terabytes of free data. And what did I think about that? And it's like, well, first off, it'll take you 3 months to upload the data. And then when you get a notice, the company's shutting down because they can't monetize that correctly. I don't know how long you'll have to get it back again. Yeah. So, there's these kinds of concerns as well.
And by the way, where is that being stored if it's, if you don't know?
That's a whole other thing, yeah.
So the other change that we're seeing is the rotational drives down to SSDs.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like when you folks, if you haven't done it, if you haven't taken your old machine and upgraded it to an SSD, it's like a whole new machine. So what does that mean for the future of storage? Because SSDs, I mean, we haven't had SSDs at this level deployed for that long.
Right.
So do we start to worry? Do we trust rotational drives since they're a little more of a proven technology until we get more information on SSDs? How does that figure into what you do and what we should be doing?
Well, SSDs are awesome, and Flash is awesome, and I think certainly mobile devices, obviously it's just Flash now. You know, the early iPods had hard drives, little teeny tiny hard drives,
right.
But now it's all Flash. And computers seem like, you know, laptops certainly, it's a 50-50. Now, maybe even more so Flash-based. We'll see desktop computers next, you know, as they move to a Flash. A terabyte of Flash is about $500 now to a consumer. So, you know, you get to the point where you're buying that new iMac where that sort of makes sense, right? So I think we'll see Flash more and more. It's super fast. You don't have any of the transactional spin-up issues that you get with rotating media. And, you know, every Drobo in the line now, with the exception of the very entry-level one, but every other Drobo that we sell takes a combination of Flash and spinning media. So even in this, you know, which is principally a consumer product, you can mix Flash and rotating media to accelerate the product itself. But I fully expect that for a lot of consumers, you know, a generation of Drobo in a few years will have Flash drives in it. You'll still want them to be removable because you'll afford 250s and then 500s and then, you know, you'll want to keep upgrading them over time. And they can fail, so you'll want some level of redundancy. Right. So I don't think anything about, you know, MOLE-based storage or storage management changes, except you get a much better level of performance, a much more sort of instant-on experience. So I think it'll continue to migrate over. The question is, you know, how long will the spinning disk be with us, right? And you know, the capacities have hit 6 terabytes now, and it's going to be a while till you can afford 6 terabytes of Flash reasonably. So it seems like they're keeping a pace ahead of the Flash media. So I'm not sure where that crossover point's going to be. And it's something that's been anticipated for a long time. I remember when we were originally funding Drobo back in 2005, people asking me whether it would be okay with Flash. You know, it could happen any time, this crossover. So we're about 10 years on from that point, and it's definitely moved a long way. So I wonder how long it'll be until we see that crossover, but it will happen at some point for most people.
Yeah. Let's switch to Drobo itself and how it plays, because this device is primarily for the consumer, for a lot of folks here.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you're all consumers, so if you're not, I'm sorry. But how about the enterprise space? Drobo can solve a lot of problems in the enterprise. Does enterprise want those problems solved, or are they still too wedded to their technical support staff and people that would rather do things on a command line than just have it work the way a Drobo does?
Well, fastest growing product right now is the business product. We make a 12-slot rack mount solution for principally used with VMware environments, and that's our fastest growing line. So a couple of years ago, I would have said no, but it seems like, you know, we're getting a little bit of traction in that market. Which we're really happy about. It's easy to use, it's super simple, the lights are good even in the data center, you know what's going on, it's very easy to do. So yeah, we're seeing some traction there. I think it'll be a very slow progress, but we're seeing traction there. But our first love is, you know, these desktop systems and consumers. You know, the goal with Drobo when we founded it was to make storage something that just anybody could use and everybody could use without having to worry about it, and that's still, you know, we're still working on that problem. So.
I'm curious, folks, how many people here have a Drobo? Okay.
Thank you very much.
How many people have more than one Drobo?
Thank you very much.
People. How about transporters? Okay. These are things that you really should look at for a lot of reasons. And I've said it so many times, I have never lost data in a Drobo. And I haven't lost it in a transporter yet either, but that's a whole different animal. But this is just the way. I mean, I'm sure that every session you go to, you're going to hear about backup, and you're going to hear about a lot of disasters and things you need to be doing. And this is not an absolute solution, but this can solve a lot of problems and save you from a lot of disasters.
Thanks, Joe.
You know, and because I've had drives go bad, and you come home and that little red light is there, and it's like, uh-oh.
It's not an if, it's a when, right?
And the first time, you know, you're thinking, oh boy, you know, this is when it's going to prove itself, and it has proven itself. So, what's the future of Drobo? Just more of the same, or I mean, I don't expect you to tell me any of the deep dark secrets, but are we just going to continue on the same vector?
We definitely continue to refresh the technology. Different connectivity options continue to evolve on the computers, and so we continue to support those. The new Drobo just has a USB 3, which is new for us, high performance there. And the internal architectures as well, we can offer more. Like the new entry-level Drobo now has a battery backup in it, which keeps the processor running even when the power goes out. So it keeps the system running, and it can settle itself down in just the right way, which is something you only used to see in enterprise storage, and we brought it down to the mid-range, to the mid-range Drobos, and now down to the entry level. So those technical advantages, can work down as the cost factor of introducing them changes. So that's good. But we're also working on some fairly innovative software, and now Transporter and Drobo are part of the same family. There's some great opportunities for fusion there. We think about 300,000 active Drobo users today, and we feel a lot of them could benefit from the Transporter technologies that we have in-house. And we have a good history of bringing the Transporters, upgrading them in the field and bringing them on to new generations. So there's a lot of exciting stuff we're doing in that area too. It's new software, new hardware for sure. Yeah.
This is more just for me, and I hope it's not stepping on any toes. But you were CEO of Transporter. You're CEO now of Drobo. Are they still two separate companies? Are they going to come together?
No, we merged them together back in June of last year.
Okay, so
it's a unified team, two separate brands, two separate product lines, which have very different identities, but one company and one team.
Good. Okay, great.
Like a Mac and an iPhone, for example. Two different brands, one company.
Good example. Folks, how about if we have questions for Geoff? Anything you want to know about Drobo, Transporter, storage? Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the difference between the new Transporter product line and Pogo plug?
Yeah, of course, that's easy. So the question was, can I talk about the difference between Transporter and something like a Pogo plug, which has been with us many years? It's a great question. So there are a number of products like the Pogo plug, and what the Pogo plug does, for those of you who don't know, is you put it at home, you connect a hard drive to it, and you can access your data when you're on the road. So it's a great way to get those files that you have back home. The big difference between something like that and Transporter is two key differences. First of all, Transporter has the Dropbox interface, so it's just integrated with Finder and Explorer. If you've used Dropbox, it's exactly the same experience using Transporter, so that's very different, whereas a lot of these products have Java apps or some other way to manage the files on them, web browsers. The second and most important difference is that Transporters mesh together, okay? So if you have a single Pogo plug or device like it, anybody who wants to get the data have to come into your house, and the data lives in your house, and so have to drag off their own copies of it. With Transporters, you can have 10 of you can have a Transporter each. You can combine files or documents or media collections, and it will replicate to all the different Transporters. You can make changes and modifications that replicate around the other Transporters. So the benefits of that are everybody has their own copy. It's super fast access. Any accesses you're doing are all local, so they're very fast over your local network. Then they migrate out to the other ones, and you can build super large networks of these things, tens or up to 100 Transporters, all sharing different data sets. It's good for backup. It's good for redundancy. It's good for wide area access. So it's that ability to mesh Transporters together. You can make your own backup solution with one or two sites, collaborate with 3 or 4 colleagues. You and a friend can share movies or music or whatever it is very privately, in your own 2 Transport network. Absolutely. So that's the key difference. The other products are point solutions that don't talk to each other. Great question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. How do you back up a Transporter?
That's a good question. So Transporters will replicate amongst themselves. So if you have a Transporter one location, a Transporter another location, the files will sync with your computers and to that Transporter, and then from that Transporter to another Transporter where you co-locate it. So for example, I have one at home, I have one at the office. I back up my iPhoto library onto the Transporter at home, and then that syncs into the office. And sometimes when I make a large change, it can take hours to sync, right? It takes a long time to move files. But with the cloud service, what you'd have to leave the computer on and syncing up to the cloud. What's nice about the transporter is the local sync happens over the LAN, so it's really quick. Turn the computer off, the laptop off, and then the transporter feeds it out to the office. So I've got another copy if my house is burglarized or some other disaster burns down, whatever it is. I know my data is offsite and protected, but somewhere where I've got control of it. Two benefits, I guess, against cloud backup. One is that if something went wrong with the transporter at home, my computers just all route to the transporter in the office, because you can connect to a transporter if you're on the road, or you don't have to be local with it to access it, and that just happens automatically behind the scenes. And then secondly, you can just go get it. So if you put a terabyte of data in the cloud, it can take weeks to recover, or you have to pay them to put it on a drive and send that to you. With Transporter, if you've got it, a relation's house or a friend's house or your office, you just go get it, and you've got the data right there. So it's super accessible.
So anything you put in on the office backs it up to the other location?
Yeah, it'll be the same. They'll both be identical.
Anything you put in the other location backs that up to?
That's right. Yeah. Without you having to configure anything, no syncs, no time schedules, nothing. That's just the way it works. So you work on the files on your computer, that automatically gets put on the transport, and that automatically gets moved off-site without you having to configure anything. Okay. Thanks for the question.
One more before we... Yes, sir.
Nope, that's a great question. So the question was, what happens when two different conflicting things happen at two different locations? It's a great question. So if there's a way to resolve them sensibly, then we do that. And we behave the same way that a file server would behave. So if Frank changes the name of a folder and then Bob changes the name of the folder a little bit later, this one will be the change, just like he had changed on the file server and he'd changed it to something else. So where it's sensible, we just resolve it that way. Where it's something that you can't resolve, Frank and Bob both change the same spreadsheet and they save it more or less at the same time, with two completely different change sets. Then we do the same thing Box or Dropbox do, which is we create two copies of it. So you have both of the documents still, and then you can figure out what you want to call them or how you want to resolve that change. So, same as the other cloud services. Great question, thanks.
Okay, so I think this is what everybody's been waiting for, is somebody gets to take home a Drobo and become a convert.
Oh, that's exciting.
That's what I'm told anyway.
All right.
Is that what's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay.
We announce a Drobo. You pick the winner, Chuck.
No.
Here, please. All right, come on. You got to. You're a visiting celebrity.
All right. So, dig deep. The man says. So I'll dig deep and turn him over a couple times. And so I can't see anything. I have no idea who this person right here is. Ooh. Is it? Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm going to butcher this name. Mr. Dahl? Is it Rainier Dahl? Is that?
Somebody at the back?
How bad did I butcher it, sir? Minor. Okay, good. Good. I didn't do too bad. So.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you. Folks, thank you very much. Jeff, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chuck.
Really appreciate it.
Really nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Camera work by John Zakowski of Azimuth Productions Video San Francisco at videosanfrancisco.com. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, and Facebook. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.